Morning, everyone. I just want to really quickly thank the organizers as well as the distinguished list of speakers. I'm very, very happy to be here. I thought I'd begin my speech with a very, very short, somewhat funny story. Now, as a debater, one of the things that predominantly takes place once a debate starts is something which we call asking for POIs, which are points of information. So basically, you have a speaker who's standing up there, and then at any given moment, when someone wants to ask them a question, they stand up and then they say POI, which means point of information. One of the best examples of this was when I was at a tournament just a few years ago, when I was still debating actively. We had a very, very engaging speaker who stood up and started giving all his arguments, categorically. Immediately, all three of his opponents stood up simultaneously and said POI. All of them had something to say about his argument. So the speaker who was up there, visibly agitated, somewhat annoyed, looked at the three of them and said, "I'll take the ugliest one of you." Instantly, of course, that caused all of them to sit right back down. So this was one of the key highlights that I had, as a participant, as a debater. Now, of course, I don't do so much of that anymore because I mostly focus on the coaching aspect. When I was 19, I became a competitive debater at the recommendation of a very close friend. I was a sprightly teenager, as you would be at 19, and I had a very tumultuous mind. No proper outlet. I didn't really engage in bad habits, but definitely didn't have a proper outlet until I became a debater. One of the things I was most blessed with when I first became a debater is the fact that I had one of Malaysia's best debate coaches as my very, very first coach. In that sense, I had hit the jackpot as I became a debater. I won under his tutelage. I won my very first tournament just 3 months later. It was him who introduced me to an idea that I'd never really heard of before until that point. And that idea was that we needed to learn how to think rather than what to think. Most of the time, it's really easy to get locked down in dogma, whether it's religious values or cultural values, economic or political systems. It's really easy to get locked into dogma unless you have objective standards to compare that dogma to. And that was one of the predominant lessons that our coaches would continuously stress when he was teaching us. My coach understood a very important fact that one day, perhaps not too long in the near future, he wouldn't actually be around to look after us intellectually anymore, that we would be left to fend for ourselves, whether it was about religion, politics, economics, or societal issues. He knew that one day we would have to look after ourselves intellectually and should not fall prey to the ideas and systems that we don't necessarily understand. He also knew that without objective standards and critical thought, we will fall victim to ever-changing narratives and carefully constructed methods of persuasion. That, more than anything, was what shaped me as a debate coach. It's a common misconception that every time you win a debate or an argument, that you will in some way have changed the minds and hearts of the people that you've won over. We tend to feel like if I defeat this person, I am inherently, in some way or another, slightly smarter than that individual. It's one of the thoughts that tends to go through our heads. The truth is, right, every time we win a debate tournament, more than anything else, it is for the debater themselves. One of the first things that happens when someone is defeated, we would imagine that they would open their minds. They would be more receptive towards the ideas that have challenged their own ideas. Instead, the exact opposite tends to happen. When someone is defeated in a debate, the first thing that happens is what we call the hardening process. So this person begins to go through a cocoon phase. Instead of them, uplifting themselves and coming out of it, they tend to seal up, right? But a very strange thing begins to happen the more you lose a debate. On average in Malaysia at least, for every 70 or 80 tournaments that you don't win, you will eventually win one, right? So if you make it to 140 tournaments, you win 2, and then 210, 3, and so on. That's the average, at least in Malaysia. I worked it out with the debate coach. I don't know if it's correct, but that was the figure that we arrived at. But a very strange thing tends to happen after you've undergone that process, because when you do finally win a debate tournament, we imagine that these debaters go around patting themselves on the back, telling everyone what great debaters that they are. But the opposite is also true there. So instead of doing that, what actually happens is we become even more critical and analytical of the things that we are saying. We go back and forth, usually in the shower. Was I actually telling a lie? And that was credited from the judge. Was I actually telling the truth? Did my arguments have substantive value? Did my principle and value judgment arguments play out in that process? That's one of, I think, the most fascinating things about being in a debate. So what about the person who loses that particular debate? After going through that hardening process, or the cocoon phase, as we like to call it, at some point in time, given enough time and given enough patience, those individuals who had been losing debates in the past start winning debates as well, right? And that's where we talk about how the healing process begins in that individual's life and in their debating career as well. I think at this point, the problem from all the previous speakers that we've heard, the problem that we see arising, as well as why debating is so important, should become more evident. Most of us, whether we realize it or not, tend to shy away from debate and discourse. We say things like, that's not me. We'll say things like, I'm not the argumentative type. We say, I'm a peaceful person. I try to stay away from drama as much as I can. In a perfect world, that would be nice. And that would be something that we could actually do on a day-to-day basis. The problem is, of course, that even the most introverted, most peace-loving individuals still debate with themselves all the time, whether they like to realize it or not. The truth is, we all do this, but recognizing the fact that there are indeed better and worse ways to debate is probably the first step in nurturing a more rational, level-headed society. For me, as a debate coach, winning a debate is merely a means to an end, a remarkable tool that we created to clearly and coherently transmit ideas and correct them where they need correcting, as well as discard them when they need to be discarded. Thank you.